people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Further confirmation of what we already knew. Vasyl Lomachenko versus George Kambosos for the vacant IBF lightweight world title is being finalized in Australia for April. Bob Arum has declared. And this doubles as a rebound fight and a title fight for the former champions. They've both been unified, Vasyl Lomachenko and George Kambosos. I said it before and I'll say it again. As far as I'm concerned, Vasyl Lomachenko should be coming off a win, and George, he should be coming off a loss. He lost that Maxie Hughes fight. I felt Vasyl Lomachenko won the Devin Haney fight, alongside many others on both sides of the business. The fans,
the fighters, the pros, the pundits, the promoters. I mean, it just is what it is. Boxing is a funny old game.
Things even. Vasyl Lomachenko should still have enough to beat today's George Kambosos because Maxie Hughes, a southpaw, a mobile southpaw like Vasyl Lomachenko is a mobile southpaw, he arguably beat George Kambosos. And Maxie Hughes, God bless him, he's no Vasyl Lomachenko. I only wonder that the version of Lomachenko that we see in April won't be a disheartened, disillusioned Vasyl Lomachenko that's still going through the motions, just going through the motions, with enough in the tank to beat the likes of a George Kambosos, but not fighting with the same spirit and the same vim and vigor that he used to. Though context is key. The scalp of George Kambosos, in spite of this fight's outcome seeming like a foregone conclusion that Vasyl Lomachenko should win, it's still a respectable scalp, and it's still a respectable fight. George, like Loma, was Ring Magazine lineal and unified champion, and he's only ever really lost to one guy, at least on paper, that guy being Devin Haney, who beat him 2 times on Australian soil, but still, it's the same guy. He's got 2 recorded losses to the same guy. Still a respectable scalp in today's lightweight division. He is a former champion. He does still have a recorded win over then champion Teofimo Lopez in what was one of the bigger upsets of that year, if not the biggest. And even if I would pick Teofimo to beat him in a rematch, that rematch hasn't actually happened. You don't get brownie points for fights that never take place in the postulations of fight fans.
Huh?
What does all that mean? That means that even though I don't have any illusions about George Kambosos, that still is a respectable scalp for Vasyl Lomachenko. That if he can go in there and beat this guy in good fashion, well, it's still worth something because Teofimo didn't beat that guy. Even if I think he would in a rematch. Hasn't happened. This is one of Devin Haney's best wins. This is one of the best names on his resume. The name of then champion George Kambosos. So he dominated 2 times on Australian soil. Thus, if Vasyl Lomachenko can go over there and do the same thing, beat him in dominant fashion, hell, if he can stop him, knock him out, it's still worth something. And what that would communicate is that even though Loma's not everything today that he used to be yesterday, he's still on the level, and he's still one of the best fighters at or around these weights. Interestingly enough, some popular periodicals and their pound-for-pound lists, they've had Vasyl Lomachenko there the whole time, whereas he's been absent from the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list ever since he lost to Lopez. If he can beat George in Australia and become a 3-time lightweight champion, he will have an argument to be reintegrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list on the predication that he's already got a great body of work. He's already been a 3-division champion and beaten several champions. If he can get his hands on a belt, given everything he's done so far, he can get back on the list. He's got some stiff competition, though. Some other names that are in the running. Former 3-division champion Kosei Tanaka of Japan. Very soon, he could become a 4-division champion, as well as Japan's own Junto Nakatani. What's going on there? Junto Nakatani, who knocked out Maloney for the WBO title at Superfly, he's now moving up to Bantam, and he's vacated the WBO title he won from him. As a result, Kosei Tanaka will now challenge for that title, while Junto attempts to unseat beat Santiago.
Alejandro Santiago, who very recently beat former champion Nonito Donaire for what was the newly vacated WBC title at bantamweight at 118 pounds. You know, after Inoue became undisputed and vacated all the belts, then moved up in weight.
They staged Donaire versus Santiago for the newly vacated WBC title, and to my surprise, Santiago won the fight. He won that fight. I don't think he's going to win this one. I think Junto is going to do to Santiago what he did to Maloney.
These are the other names that are in the running to be integrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. It's not just Vasyl Lomachenko, it's Junto Nakatani, it's Kosei Tanaka.
There could be one or two new pound-for-pound entrants on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list next year. Don't mind Vasyl Lomachenko versus George Kambosos as a fight, but I don't have any illusions about it either. What it seems to me, what it is a rebound fight that doubles as a title fight. And I'm okay with that. Men's middleweight news, we now know Eddie Hearn blames Chris Eubank Jr. for failed Conor Benn talks. It's ego, stupidity, a lack of common sense.
They were motivated, they were driven to do the fight between Chris and Conor early next year in February, but once again, something has gotten in the way.
Eddie Hearn, who was trying to push Eubank versus Benn for February 3rd at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London, said that Eubank's incessant demands for an exorbitant purse was what killed the deal. Specifically, Hearn said Eubank wanted a guaranteed purse that incorporated potential pay-per-view upsides, and that for the promoter, that was a non-starter. Eubank pulls a number out of the sky, and I'm just like, huh? How? Hearn said on Boxing with Chris Mannix's podcast. Well, you said it was the biggest fight in the history of British boxing. Mate, I'm a promoter. What do you want me to say? That it's not a big fight? I mean, it is a big fight, but a lot of the time, on pay-per-view upsides, you need to back yourself. If you think that it can succeed, then no problem. You'll hit your number. But we can't put guarantees in for numbers that we won't hit. We know it's a huge pay-per-view, but you can't just have a conversation where you say, it does 1 million buys, does it? If it does 1 million buys, congratulations. You're actually going to get more than your number. So surely, if you back yourself to do 1 million, we're in, alright? Oh no, you've got to pay me up front for the 1 million buys. Huh? How? I don't want to do a fight where I lose $3 or $4 million. What's the point in that?
This is what we're always talking about.
The problem with asking for a huge guarantee ahead of a fight that could be billed as a pay-per-view is it becomes more of a gamble due to the guarantee.
Guaranteed purses.
Guarantees to the fighters, because if one fighter's guaranteed a huge purse amount, it won't be long before the other starts to ask for something comparable, before the other fighter asks for one too. You use Wilder versus Fury 2 as an example. A pay-per-view, a rematch that sold a lot more than the first fight did, but the first fight made money, the second one didn't. Why?
The second fight didn't make any money.
It lost money, and bear with me here. The second fight generated more money than the first fight did, but overall it lost money because it was more expensive to put on. And it was more expensive to put on because Fury and Wilder's guaranteed purses were huge. In guaranteed purses, they must have spent somewhere in between $50 to $60 million.
Pay attention. In the first fight, the guarantees to the fighters, to both fighters, only came out to roughly $7 million, so that in the second fight, they could end up shelling out $50 to $60 million. That's a big jump, and that makes the fight a lot riskier to put on.
Eddie Hearn continued, Conor signed, Cali was all in, and Chris Eubank Jr. wasn't, Hearn said. It's so frustrating, I'm saying. What are you gonna do? What do you mean? I've got loads of options. Huh? No, you haven't. He's going to end up taking a fight for a quarter of what we offered him against maybe the IBO champion at middleweight. It's ego, stupidity, and a lack of common sense. But mostly, it's someone in your ear who is a complete clown and has no idea of what they're talking about. Welcome to the world of boxing.
They got the deal done before, and the fight was all but made when it was first canceled. So I can only deduce that Chris must be asking for more money now than he stood to make the first time out, because they got the fight done. the first time out.
Thus, Chris must now be asking for more money. Chris Eubank Jr., who took to his social media and said went to sleep after agreeing to fight Janibek for world titles, woke up, and now my promoter, Kale Sorland, is trying to make me fight Etinosa Oliha, a boxer nobody has heard of. Wasserman Boxing, how and why? That's what Chris Eubank Jr. had to say about it. Here's what his promoter had to say about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into it too much. I think Junior's obviously a bit frustrated about the whole situation. You know, there's big fights that I haven't got made now, and I'll put it down to that.
So, what's going on here? I'll try my best to make it make sense. Eddie Hearn says that Chris is now asking for a guarantee that makes the fight too risky to put on. I'm making the inference that he's asking for more money than he did the first time out because the first time the fight got done, whereas this time it didn't.
He's asking for more money.
So much money, a guaranteed purse so big that doing the fight becomes very, very risky. Too risky to do. And the perfect example of this is Wilder vs. Fury 1 and Wilder vs. Fury 2. Even though Wilder vs. Fury 1 sold less pay-per-views than the second fight did, the first fight made money, the second fight lost money. Why? It's a guaranteed purses. It made the second fight a lot more expensive to put on, thus riskier than the first one was. There were only $7 million in guaranteed purses to both of the fighters, whereas in the second fight was 50 to 60 million in guaranteed purses. That's 7 to 8 times more money in guaranteed purses, which makes the second fight a lot riskier and a lot more expensive to put on. That means you have to sell that many more pay-per-views to cover those guarantees, and they didn't. They didn't break even. Per Bruce Trempler of Top Rank. He said it himself. Even though it did a great gate, it didn't break even in terms of pay-per-view buys, so they ended up losing money. Now, Bruce pointed to piracy as the reason, when in reality, it wasn't piracy. It's that you guaranteed those guys too much money. The guarantees to the fighters would have been a little bit more modest, say, I don't know, 10 million to Fury and 10 million to Wilder. That would have been only 20 million in guaranteed purses, but not 50 or 60. And it's easier to cover that 20 million than it is to cover that 60 million. So if the guarantees would have been lower, not only would they have broken even and been able to cover the operational costs for the show, but they would have made money. The fighters as well, they would have made money on the upside because the upside would have been easier to hit.
And that's how you reconcile the second fight selling more than the first but still flopping. It's because the second fight costed a lot more money to make.
And that is the situation that Eddie Hearn is trying to prevent. He doesn't want to spend so much in guarantees that they're difficult to cover, that they can't break even. He wants to keep the purses at a modest amount so that the upside is easier to hit.
And so they don't lose money. And don't misunderstand me, because that's not at the expense of the fighters. The fighters have their guarantees and they can make more money off the upside.
It's not like they can't make more money. They can. But you don't want to go rolling a dice and overspending, then end up in the red. You want to stay in the black.
It's not the first time a major fight fell apart for Chris Eubank Jr. because of demands on his side. That's what happened to the Golovkin fight.
That's why that fell apart, and that's why Kell Brook ended up standing in his place, due to demands, outlandish demands, from the Eubank side of things.
Now history is repeating itself.
Now what Chris is saying is that he went to bed having agreed to face Janibek for his 2 alphabet titles, but his promoter's now pushing him to face the IBO champion instead. And I don't know that I can believe that coming from Chris, when it was Chris who was downing Janibek downing Vincenzo Gualtieri, saying nobody knows them. So you're telling me you're walking away from a mega fight for mega money into a riskier fight for less money.
Oh, and it's the Sauerlands pushing you to fight for the IBO.
Like when you fought Reynold Quinlan for it up there at 168 years ago. You're trying to put that on the Sauerland brothers. You're saying that's them. Well, let me tell you something.
What?
Chris Eubank Jr. is not a little boy, you know? He's not a child. No one can force him into a fight that he doesn't want to have. If he ends up fighting Etinosa Oliha, it's because he wants to. Nobody can make him do it. If that fight materializes after this fight fell apart, it's on you.
No way that fight happens unless you want it to happen. And it really is as simple as that. Not dissimilar from what we saw years ago with Golovkin. Maybe your daddy, maybe your father didn't want you to have that fight, though. Ultimately, you must not have wanted it either. Because if you wanted to fight him, you would have fought him. You're not a child.
Daddy wouldn't have been happy about it, but he can't stop you. You're a grown man. You were a grown man then, and you're a grown man now. If you don't want to fight the IBO champion, then the fight doesn't happen. If the fight that you want is the Janibek Alimkhanalai fight, then that's the fight you'll end up having. Though once again, it's hard to believe that because he was downing Janibek, saying that nobody knows him, and we all know that the fight with Conor has more of a profile. It's worth more money. Oh, you probably can A-side Janibek Alimkhanalai. Even though he's a champion, you do make more money than he does, but being the A-side in a Janibek fight doesn't pay as much as fighting in that Conor Benn fight that you just priced yourself out of.
Being the A-side to a Janibek doesn't pay as much as fighting Conor and Weiss. Fighting Janibek is a riskier fight, a much riskier fight than the Conor Benn fight because Conor's a naturally smaller fighter moving up in weight.
Conor Benn fight is a more winnable fight. You want us to believe you're foregoing that fight for a more dangerous one that pays less money. That's hard to believe. And more power to him if he's serious. If he's serious about fighting Janibek, I would like to see it. I just question.
Is he serious?
How does Etinosa Oliha come into it? Oh, right. You're putting that on the Sauerland brothers. You're saying they want you to fight that guy. But if you don't want to, it don't happen. So it's neither here nor there, is it? Listen,
Look.
there's nothing so remarkable, nothing so spectacular about Chris Eubank Jr.'s boxing career or his boxing ability that we should spend this much time on him. But this is boxing news, and this is a sordid affair, so when I look at it, it looks like Chris was trying to hold the Conor Benn fight for ransom.
He started asking for more money.
That backfired. That killed the fight. Now, in order to get out of his comeuppance, he wants me and you to believe that he's gonna go fight Janibek. The same Janibek you told the WBO you don't want to fight. The same WBO you told not to rank you and not to order it because you're not interested. That was just a few weeks ago.
Because now you're interested?
This looks like he doesn't want to get blamed for killing the Conor Benn fight, then turning around and fighting some ham and egger because he has to fight someone.
Janibek has been calling him out, but Janibek is too dangerous and it doesn't pay enough. It doesn't pay what the Conor Benn fight pays. So what he wants to do is fight this IBO guy in a keep busy fight.
Keep busy, beat that guy, and then come back to the table for the Conor Benn fight because that's the most money. That's the biggest money fight Chris can be in right now. So he'll come back to it. In the meantime, maybe Conor can fight Mario Barrios or Kell Brook. There are talks about maybe putting him in there with Kell Brook, presumably at 154, because I don't think Kell can make 147, not here and now and not at this age. You do it at junior middle or middle. Maybe that can be Conor's introduction to the middleweight division since his last fight was at junior middle. You let him fight Kell, you build up the Eubank Jr. fight a little more, then you revisit that fight over the summer or fall months in the coming year. I don't think the fight is all the way dead.
It's on hold for now, and I don't expect that Chris Eubank Jr., of all people, is gonna roll the dice while he waits.